Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Brian, and this is Structural Anatomy Arms, and we're going to spend an entire term focused on arms. And today in particular is going to be like a strict anatomy day. I mean, we're going to be going over pretty much all the anatomy. We'll be grouping some things and kind of simplifying like a couple things, but most of it we're just going to go through bit by bit and talk about it. For the most part, this class is not going to be like a full anatomy class. We're mostly going to be drawing arms and, like little structural type arms. But it's also an anatomy class, and the anatomy is important. So we're going to spend week one focused on anatomy, and then week two we'll be going through gesture and just talking about gesture and how gesture relates to arms, because gesture is also super important. I mean, if you're not building on top of something that's practical, then, it's not going to work out real well. So kind of like learning things kind of from the ground up. We'll do gesture week two, and then weeks 3, 4, and 5, we'll be kind of just getting into drawing arms and going nuts on the arm drawing. So today, again, it's going to be boring. We're going to just start out just talking about a whole bunch of muscle names right now. I'm going to literally just write them down for you because I don't have them. Well, I don't know. For me, whatever reason, some people find this helpful. I found it helpful to just learn the names. Also, to think of them kind of grouped, right? Like we need to kind of start organizing things. And I guess that's kind of more what I'm thinking of here is we got all these muscles, right? And all these little attachment points and stuff. But how do we organize it? Like, how do we think of this in a way that'll help our mind kind of navigate it? And to me, we got to kind of start grouping things together and thinking of things in terms of, function a little bit. And like, I don't know, they have like a hierarchy. You'll see what I mean. But we're just going to start out with a basic list, right? So we're going to start with the shoulder, right? Because there's kind of like a shoulder group, and then we have like an upper arm group, and then kind of like a forearm or lower arm group, right? So that's how we're going to kind of group these things together. So we'll start with the shoulder. And we're literally going to write all these down. This is going to take a little while. It's going to be kind of a long demo. The week one anatomy demo, at least in my class, they tend to be long, right? Shoulder. Okay, so down here we have your rotator cuff muscles, essentially, right? So we have like the supraspinatus, right, which is supraspinatus. The other reason I think you guys should try writing them down, and it's fine if you just want to watch this and not write them down, that's okay. But I don't know, it helps me kind of remember things when I write them down. That's partly why I'm doing this. Also, seeing these things written out is helpful because they're weird names that, they're like mostly Latin, and most of us don't speak Latin, because I don't. So I had to actually like look at them and see them written out to kind of know what it was that this thing was actually saying. So infraspinatus is the next one, right? So in the shoulder we have supraspinatus, infraspinatus. Also, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing these things correctly or not. I never went to medical school. And also, as I mentioned, I don't speak Latin. So I take my best guess, and I don't know, I'm sure it's wrong. If anybody went to med school or speaks Latin, feel free to let me know how these things are pronounced, because I am curious. I mean, I would actually like to know, seriously, if people do know. Okay, teres minor. And then teres major. Right, and then we've got one missing actually. I photographed the list the last time I did this, and so I have that kind of off to the side just in case I get stuck, and I'm actually realizing there's something missing on the old one. So if you were in my class last time I did this, you can create an updated list that includes the deltoid on here. I left that off the last one apparently. Boom, deltoid. All right, and then we get the upper arm, right? So we go upper arm. upper arm. Then we have kind of the ridge muscles I would include in upper arm. Well, actually, no, we're going to include those in forearm. Let's just do upper arm for now. So we have brachialis, right? So brachialis, biceps brachii, what we usually just think of as biceps, or the bicep. Two eyes at the end, because it's cool that way. And also that's how it's spelled. Coracobrachialis is next. Don't worry, we will be going over these and drawing them in a second. Coraco. I know not a lot of our classes come with written portions, but I actually do recommend stuff at least once. Or boom, there we go. We got our upper arm muscles, right? And then the forearm. And the forearm is complex. There's a lot to it. So we're going to group some stuff, right? The way, oops, sorry, I just realized I scratched the microphone. Hopefully it didn't bother people. But we're going to group some stuff in the forearm because there's a lot going on. And for the type of drawing we're going to do, like, yes, it's anatomical, but I also deal a lot kind of in three-dimensional forms and underlying structure. And, you know, like, we're not going to go take these up to like a full anatomical rendering type level, which means we can kind of get away with simplifying some forearm stuff. So we're going to take like kind of the bottom muscles here and group them together and just refer to them as flexors. And then there's a group of muscles on the top that we'll kind of group together and just kind of call extensors, you know. And then there's individual other muscles on the forearm that are important that function kind of separately from those two groups. So we'll go over those for sure. But flexors and extensors are about as far as we go. And then we will talk about, when the time comes, when we're drawing them, how that flexor group will then just kind of branch off into multiple tendons, each going and doing their own thing. And even though those technically go to different muscles, they can all just kind of come from one big one right there. And it works pretty well. Somebody has to be pretty lean before that starts to break down. Okay, forearm. Also, I would recommend taking the time to look up and learn those muscles at some point. You don't have to do it right now for what we're going to be doing in this class, but you do kind of need to know them if you're going to really take this, you know, as far as you can. Let's see, I want this to fit here. Let's start right here. So we have flexors. Right, and then extensors, as I just mentioned. Also, I feel like going through and actually saying the names and getting to hear me say each one and write each one down and talk about each one a little bit is important as well, at least for learning purposes. I don't know. I found it helpful when I did this. And conius. The little one that goes like kind of on the bottom of your elbow a little bit, or kind of on your forearm, but like back against your elbow, a little triangular muscle. And then we have abductor pollicis longus. I'm not going to spell out all of that because it doesn't fit. So we're going to go ABD for abductor, pollicis. And then we'll put longus down here. Abductor pollicis longus. We have extensor. pollicis, brevis, these kind of attach and run and connect to the thumb, but they kind of sit independently, like that kind of, I was talking about grouping things. Well, this group that I was talking about goes down and connects to hand things. This one, these two kind of sit, well, one sits down here, but the other cuts across kind of the other way, and they connect to your thumb. So they kind of get their own category because they poke out on the side and do their own thing over here a little bit. And they're separate from this other stuff. Okay, where was I? Oh, brachioradialis. So we have ridge muscles. I'm going to include ridge muscles as forearm muscles because that's mostly where they go. But those are the ones that come up and connect. Let's see if I can get on camera. They come up and connect way up here and then run like all the way down across your forearm. Those are your ridge muscles. But we have brachioradialis. Then extensor carpi radialis longus. Extensor carpi radialis. Longus. There we go. This kind of sits separately from these. So that's kind of what we need to know for the arm, anatomy-wise. At least as artists. I mean, there's more to it. I mean, there's a lot of like little deeper muscles in your forearm and stuff that, as I was saying, we're grouping things. But this is kind of the important stuff, the important functional stuff and the stuff that affects surface morphology and function. And so the next step is we'll talk about the forearm and kind of like how, almost like a little floor chart in a way to think about the forearm. Like I had a lot of trouble with forearms. They're tough because they pronate, right? Like they have that weird ability to sit like this. And then without rotating our arm, we can rotate just our forearm. And those bones are actually crossing over. We'll talk about that in a bit too. But forearms are weird, so I had trouble with them. So I came up with this weird little way of thinking of them. It's just like a little flow chart, basically. So we have like forearm up here. Forearm, and then that sort of breaks down to like the inside of the elbow. And outside of the elbow. Oops. Those are basically connection points. So when you're looking at a forearm and you're trying to figure out what you're looking at, you got to think like, okay, wait a minute. What am I seeing here? Am I kind of seeing the inside of the elbow or the outside of the elbow? Am I seeing what's going on? So if you're seeing the inside of the elbow, that then, and both the inside and outside of the elbow are connection points for key things, right? And on the case of the inside of the elbow, that is the connection point for the flexor group, right? So we get flexors down here, right? And then if we're seeing the outside of the elbow, that kind of does a couple different things, right? If we're seeing the outside, then we have extensors. Right, down here. And then we also have the ridge muscles. Remember they were the ones that come up and connect a little bit higher. They connect along the outside, a little bit above the elbow, but they run along the outside, kind of past it. So they're in that same area. And then there's a couple little things. And these are little, well, I shouldn't say less important. They're just a little less visible. But pronator teres, we can add, I think, to this list. Because it's visible kind of up here separate. It's visible like kind of up in here a little bit. Sometimes, not on most people, it's not super visible. But if you're like a bodybuilder or like really lean, you know, that thing might pop up. And then on this side you have anconeus, which is kind of on the, again, on the bottom of the forearm, kind of near your elbow. A little triangular muscle that sits down there. So that's our little forearm flow chart. So this is kind of like in my head, you know, when I'm looking at an arm, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. Like I'm going like, oh, wait a minute, I'm seeing the inside of this thing or the outside. And if it is the inside, then what do I need to get on there? And if it's the outside or the opposite or whatever, you know, that kind of thinking. So that being said, now we're going to draw something. First up is going to be things that kind of don't seem like arms, but they are. And that's going to be the scapula and the clavicle. We need to know both of those and what they do. They're important. And the arm connects to them, you know, and I know they seem like torso things, but like where torso starts and where arm starts, you know, or like vice versa, is they mix. They, you know, they're connected to each other, obviously. So like the arm, the clavicle and the scapula are super important in understanding how the arm connects and functions along with the torso, right? So we need to start kind of with a good little scapula shape. And so just real quick, like if I was going to just draw like a quick shape that represented a scapula, right? It would probably sit on the back something like this. And it kind of comes up this way. This would be like a right scapula. They're kind of long this way a little bit, right? This would be like a really generic, you know, like abstraction. That's the word I'm thinking of. Like a little abstraction for a scapula. Let's say kind of like that. So our real scapula shape, though, is more complex. There's actually stuff going on above it, you know, but it's covered by the tricep. So we don't see it all that clearly. So our scapula shape is going to sit kind of like this. Down this way. That way. Right, so it's really a shape kind of more like that. But then what's happening is there's like a process, I guess. It's the acromion process. Well, yeah, the acromion process. It sort of comes up off the scapula and sits up here. And that becomes the connection point for the deltoid, or for the trapezius, right? It comes down and sort of locks onto here. And so it ends up covering this part. So we don't really see that. So we kind of had that part like missing over here, right? And we end up just kind of seeing this process stick out. And it kind of comes out and becomes a connection point for things out here. Let's come out a little bit farther. Right, kind of sticks out here. Out this way. It's got like some width to it. Right, a little bit of like a boxy shape. and it comes down and connects kind of down along here. So you can see it's a thing actually kind of coming up off of there, you know, and then we can add some width, some three-dimensional form here to this piece, you know, so we can see kind of what's going on. There's also a little piece that sticks out. I've probably just seen a little bit of it maybe back here. Maybe not, it's probably covered. But this part back here has a pretty specific shape. There's another thing that kind of sticks out, but we'll see it from another angle. So this, you can see, kind of fits right here, right? Like it's kind of this shape that would become the abstraction. And then later we'll see kind of what this is for, because we'll be attaching some muscle to it. And then we get kind of some very specific ridges that run along it. Run along down this way, kind of like this, right? And it's just kind of like a raised edge, essentially, that runs along there. And it's going to be a connection point for muscles to connect all along here. Also, this is scapula. Right, scapula. Okay, so now if we look at it, this is kind of the back of the scapula. Right, but now we think, okay, from the front, we don't typically see scapulas from the front, right? Like it's not something we do because there's a torso in front of it, like we can't. So it's a weird shape that we're not used to seeing. What we will see is that the one that was up here is angled a little bit, right? So when we start seeing it down here, it'll make a shape kind of like this. It'll come in. Oh, actually, let's start over here on this side. It'll come in this way. And down. Right, and it kind of shoots out. Like this kind of shape. Well, I drew a little smaller than the one above it, but you can see this is like kind of the base, right? Like the part that that process would then stick onto. But there's another part that sticks on here, which is going to be kind of unique a little bit. Again, we get some more ridges that muscle attaches to, kind of running along here. And then especially out here, because as you're going to see in the next one, this is essentially like our basic starting shape is this kind of wedge. Or yeah, it's kind of like a little thin, long plate wedge type shape with this little part angled. You know, like we took the top and just like bent it over a little bit. And that's kind of what that top part was, where that trapezius will come down and lock on there. And then the more complex version is going to look a little bit more like this. Right, drops down. Side drops down. So then we get this kind of crazy thing that sticks on here. It looks kind of like this. It's just literally the bone. It just sticks out here. Right, kind of like that. Attaches over this way. Right, and then there's kind of this round socket type thing, right? Because remember, the shoulder is a ball and socket joint. So if we have a ball on the end of the bone, there needs to be like a socket here to kind of accept it, you know? And so it'll end up kind of like with a rounded, kind of weird shape on here a little bit. It's also a little bit flattened out in some areas, you know? It's not like perfectly round. Right, so remember this thing's rounded, so we have like a contour. It's doing like this, right? Or like this. Should be thinner. Right, so it sticks on there kind of like that. And then that process that we drew on the other one now is on the back. It's hanging off in this direction. Sticking out here and out this way. And again, we're seeing process kind of doing this. So, I mean, that looks crazy, but that's really what's going on inside your shoulders. Is this thing is sitting in there. And then these are all attachment points. There's tendons that come up and attach to these things in all these different ways, you know, and that arm bone is going to like lock right up in there. Stuff's going to come down off of there and attach to things. And it's going to be pretty cool. Let's get a couple more of these little ridges on here. Also, I drew this pretty big. I think we need to make this bigger to compensate. Make sure we get our sizing correct. It's probably better for that size thing. Makes that one look small now, but it's fine. Okay, so this is from the front. You know, again, this is like a ridge, right? So we get kind of this contour running across here. So those are super strange shapes. And again, looking at it from this angle is weird. Like up top, we can kind of recognize that as a scapula. But from this side, it's just strange. So we'll do the clavicle real quick. And then we'll go ahead and just draw some arm bones and then start working our way through muscles, right? So here, clavicle is going to be shaped kind of like this. If we're looking at a right clavicle, let's do like a front view first. If we're looking at it straight on, it's going to kind of do this. comes up slightly, and cuts across that way, right? And so it's kind of rounded on this end a bit, but then kind of flat on this end. Right, so up here it's kind of flat, and then down here more rounded. And then we get kind of like a little, I don't know, sort of connection point on the end. Because it actually connects into a joint, right? Like our clavicle is actually movable. You know, it's as we raise our arm past a certain point, we can no longer, you know, our shoulder locks and we can't move up at the shoulder anymore. And instead, our arm will continue to move up based off of this joint where it connects to the, I think it's like the manubrium or something. That little bone that goes right at the center of the rib cage, you know, right down in there. This is going to get in the way. We don't need this. But our clavicle sits here, right? It's kind of flat on the bottom. It's rounded. Right? So if we look at it then, say, from the top, if we start looking at it from below, it just flattens out. When we look at it from the top, it gets more extreme. Here, this is front. Like this kind of shape. And that's where we start getting more of that like handlebar type shape, where it'll start doing this more. Yeah, so if we start looking at it from the top, you know, we start getting, again, more of that, more dramatic handlebar shape, you know. So this will just help you kind of understand a little more like three-dimensionally what's going on. There we go. So from the top, and then we can just kind of think of it like maybe from like a 3/4 angle. You know, just try and get like a different view on it real quick. Maybe we'll come out kind of this way. And again, I just want to show that it's kind of flat on this end. bend it too much. So again, just it's an interesting shape, you know. At least I find it kind of interesting. So again, now this is kind of coming towards us a little bit more. Right, so again, kind of flat across the top. Sort of rounded here and here. And then we'll just kind of flip it around the other way. And then we can see kind of that this part is kind of like a little ball and socket joint a little bit. So again, kind of like a little rounded socket thing on there, and then flat on this end. So just kind of spinning it around different ways, seeing what's going on. Probably exaggerated that, it's a bit large, but I think it gets the point across. So this is our clavicle. And it is a right clavicle. So this is where things get interesting, right? So now we're going to come in here and just draw the rest of the bones, right? So we'll have our scapula section, and we're going to do a front and back, right? And we'll have supinated forearm bones on each side. So supinated means that the bones both come down straight, right? And it means that it's kind of like the palm view, I guess. And then the dorsal view is when the back of the hand is when our arm bones are pronated, right? So this outside arm bone now actually flips over top of this bottom one. Now they like crisscross. So supinated means not crossed. So we're going to draw them supinated. And then we'll talk about the pronation part when we get to it. So we're going to have one kind of sitting up here. We need figure out where I want that clavicle to sit. Right about here, and then connection point for the arm should sit right about here, which means the bone should drop down this direction. And make it about this long. Have that one about there, and then we'll have forearm. Connecting down here. Now, these lengths have to be really careful. The bones up here, like specifically the, what is it, humerus. Almost forgot that one. That's an important one, humerus, right? So we have the humerus, and then down here we have the ulna and the radius. But the humerus is a little bit longer than these are. But you kind of just need to kind of look at them and just try to get them proportioned as best you can. So I made a little guide for myself, you know, and I just kind of showed scapula section, humerus section, forearm section, and then we want to do the other side as well, right? So I'm going to throw in real quick where this side's going to go. And I hope it fits. Let's move it up a little bit. Might fit. Okay, let's see. And we'll have kind of the ball for the end of the humerus. It's going to drop down. Connect out. Okay, it's obviously not going to fit. Let's make it smaller. I want to get them both on here so you guys don't have to be looking all over the place. Spread this out over 2 different pages. There we go, that's better. I think that should fit. The ball for the humerus. And drop down, connect out. And then we get forearm. Double check our length. This one's going to be a little shorter. Oh, that seems about right. Okay. Double check on here real quick. Yep. Okay, so I just want to make sure those fit, right? So we just kind of roughed them in a little bit. And now I'm going to go in here and kind of lock down our shapes a little bit better. And I'm going to say, okay, we talked about the scapula. I'll come back to that in a second. Let's talk about the humerus, right? So it's a kind of long, it's a long bone, and it has this little connection point off to the side, right out here. And it sort of drops down, comes out. And it has a very specific shape to it down here, right? On this end, it sort of gets a little bit wider. Hang on, you get it right. It gets a little bit wider. And then cuts out and then down. Kind of like that. There's a little connection points down on here where a bone can rotate on it, right? Because the bones, you know, it's a joint, so bones need to kind of rotate and do things down here. Right, so the base of the humerus is pretty wide. And so on this side now, we get a very specific width to it. Be very careful with that. And then it comes down. Right, and then on this side it makes kind of more of a sweep off that direction. Connects like that. We get this little connection point here. So let me get this shape on here. There's that, and then we get this section, and the actual ball section kind of sits on there. There we go. Okay, now remember what was going on with the scapula. Remember it had this kind of crazy thing that the ball kind of locked up into. So we got to get that thing on there. Remember it had this kind of like strange thing that came off this way. It was sticking out here. A little odd, and then the rest of it came down kind of this way and then wrapped back up under there, remember, and sort of like encased it so that ball can like move around in that little socket section. You know, so it sits right in there. Remember the rest of our scapula now is kind of running back this direction. We have the clavicle and the acromion process. They meet up. They do some critical stuff up here. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and draw that acromion process on here. It needs to be sitting right up here. Right, it sits like right there. Hang on, I'm going to make it come up a little bit higher even. So we have a little bit more room. Okay, acromion process. Comes down. Connects back that way. Remember what it's doing. It's kind of coming this way and sort of locking onto here, right? And then that clavicle now, in fact, I should have left that part off because the clavicle is going to overlap it a little bit. Clavicle comes and meets right up in here. Comes in here and basically, right, we get the flat part and then kind of the more rounded part coming off that way, right? So clavicle is going to come up, flatter part, rounder part, round at the end. Here, around here, but then flat out here, although that was not a good mark. That seems better. There we go. So we can start seeing how all this stuff's like locking on there, right? We get that weird little end of the clavicle on there. We can find our scapula shape. right down here. Right, and then we go and we'll move down to the forearm now. So we're gonna have to move down here and figure out our radius and ulna, right? So the ulna connects to the elbow kind of directly, like right in the center. And it's kind of what we think of as our elbow, right? Like that little bone, that knobby bump for our elbow that moves, you know, this part, is the back of the ulna. That ulna is going to come up and connect right onto here. And stick out here. And it basically does kind of what I did here, where it has this shape to it, where it comes out kind of straight and then bends. And the bend is a functional kind of thing. It's what allows, if you could see them, I don't know, in person, like they have like a specific arc to them that allows them to overlap each other when we do this and still lay pretty flat, right? So we need to kind of capture that. So it's going to come in here. The width. This one comes down to be pretty narrow. And then they need to lock together really well. So you can see I threw a flat in here because I know automatically that if the ulna goes here, then the radius is going to end right next to it and sit like out here. Right, so we need to figure out, now remember the rotation that occurs, right? So there are two different types of joints. The elbow, or the ulna right here, can only move this way. That's it, that's all it does. It's basically just a hinge joint, you know, so it sits here and rotates front and back kind of like this. The radius, though, is a rotation type joint, right? So it sits on here, right? It sits right here and actually rotates off of that little point and rotates on it like that. And so that's what allows it to flip over the ulna. So then we get kind of a weird shape on here. This shape does serve a purpose. It's what kind of keeps things from rotating too far or too whatever, because these shapes will come in and bump into things over here, and it'll, you know, keep things locked in the right spot. So let's see. So we're gonna have to figure out how to get this shape to meld correctly with this shape. So it's gonna come down and then down this way. There we go. And this one comes out. Out. Down. Okay, so that's what we're gonna have going on in the wrist. All right, we'll come back here and we'll kind of draw that other scapula real quick. Remember, now we're looking at it from the back, right? So we want to take this whole thing and imagine it flipped around the other way. So we're going to think back to that kind of back scapula view that we talked about. Also, I want the humerus in here. This needs to be in just the right spot as well. So the humerus is going to sit out here. We get this little part first. Connects back in. All right, comes down here, comes out and down. It's kind of our ball and socket deal here. Remember, this matches up to the socket part then. Sort of disappears up in there a little bit. But then we have, remember, the process part, that acromion process that comes up off of here and sits just up over here. Remember, it's this acromion process that really makes the clavicle shape, like what we think of as the clavicle shape. Because this part right here, that pops out this way. We don't really see it. It disappears. Lock it on there like that. And then we get I'm gonna make this a little bigger. I drew this part a little bigger than intended. So I'm gonna expand this stuff around it. Try and compensate a little bit. That seems better. I guess it's gonna be too big for the bones now. It should be okay. Okay, so we get, again, these ridges on here. Now we have the clavicle on the other side, right? Because on here, on the top one, we were seeing it from the front. On here, we're seeing it now come out this direction and just sort of disappear back behind all this stuff. And then, it disappears back behind there. And then it's gone. So this back here is clavicle connecting to the chromium process up here. Okay, so let's get the rest of these bones on here. So this part comes down. I need to shrink this a little bit. Seems better. Okay, so we get bone. Very careful with the width. Being able to judge these long widths is really important, especially when it comes to gesture. When we start working on gesture next week, you're going to kind of see pretty quick how important that is. We're going to spend a whole week just kind of judging lengths and widths of arms, you know, which sounds boring, but it's going to be cool. I'll make it interesting, hopefully. Okay, so here's the back, right? Now, from the back view, fairly simple, more or less, for the humerus, but the forearms are a little bit different. So now we have the ulna, but it's coming up and locking onto here, actually. Because it's a hinge joint that actually comes up and locks onto this section of the humerus and actually wraps around it. Right, and then from there, it just kind of drops straight down that way. The wrist, and then we get some overlap here, right? So we get the radius now bumping right up against the ulna. Right, we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to get the rest of the ulna on here. Drops down here. Connects kind of like that. Now the rest of this radius, remember, it's kind of like a little rounded, again, socket, you know, that's rotating. So make sure we get some of that kind of roundedness on there. And then from here, connects back down this way. and down. This way. This way. And that way. So there's our shapes. Take your time with these. I mean, really try to get them in the right spot. Try to get them proportioned, kind of similar to how I have them proportioned. Just take your time with these because, I don't know, it's important. That's the basis for pretty much everything we're going to be drawing for the rest of the class, So having a decent understanding of this stuff can be helpful. And how to simplify these things is pretty tough. Like, most of this doesn't end up visible in a drawing, right? So it's not the end of the world if you don't master these weird little shapes up here. But we are going to go through now, and I'm going to throw some tracing paper on here. We're just going to go through each muscle real quick and just talk about where they connect. And this is... front. This is right. Arm. Back. Both supinated. I won't write that down. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with the shoulder girdle muscles. Everything that kind of holds the shoulder together, right? And so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of throw, let me get some tape ready real quick. So I'm going to tape some stuff on here. We're just going to do it with tracing paper, right? So I'm going to throw some tracing paper on here and I'll show you where each of these muscles goes one by one. And then I'll send you photos of those that you can kind of slow down and take your time. Because obviously there's a lot of them. I got to get through, I think, like 18 of these or something pretty quick. And we're kind of running out of time because these demos aren't supposed to be this long. But this one will be. Okay, I'll need a little bit of tape here. So first one. I can see them. Sorry, trying to get organized a little bit. There we go. So first one is going to be supraspinatus. Which basically sits right back here, right? So you can see it here. It fits, I mean, I drew this differently. It's not going to be the same size. But you can see kind of the humerus, right? Ending up in here. You can see our clavicle, and you can see right there where it locks on. And you can see it's running in between this stuff. The acromion process and the clavicle make like a little bridge that runs up above it. And it runs through that gap over and connects to the humerus, right? So we need to be able to come on here. A little bit of tracing paper on here. A little bit of tape real quick. And then actually draw this on here. And I'm not going to redraw the bones every single time, but I would recommend you guys do it. I mean, I did it initially with like when I created all this stuff, so it's helpful. It's good for you. It'll help build dexterity, but it's going to lock on right around here. Remember when I said these little ridges are important, right? So it locks onto this ridge right around here, and then it comes kind of up and over through the little bridge right here, and then locks onto humerus right there. So the end result, the visible parts that we're seeing, aren't going to be right here, right? So we get a chromium process overlapping it. Right, fits on there just like that. And then you can write it down and say supraspinatus. But the ones, I have all these ones, my original ones kind of photographed, so I'll send you guys those so we don't have to redraw those bones every single time right now. But supraspinatus fits right in here. You know, right in there. And then this part is like, turns into tendon. And a little bit of tendon that like locks on there. Okay, so next up. Is going to be infraspinatus. Which is right here. So there we go, infraspinatus. You can see pretty clearly, it sits on the back of the scapula again, right? Comes out and over, locks onto the humerus. So again, it's connecting down to these like ridge muscle kind of deals. So let me get a little bit more tape. So it's doing this, right? It's coming in, locking right in here, wrapping down around our ridge muscle. Dropping down, I made my scapula probably a little long. That's okay, it's going to come up and over. And then it sort of drops down and turns into tendon and wraps and connects right onto here. Right, that little wing part of the humerus that sticks out. That's the connection point for a whole bunch of stuff. So shaped like that, locks right on there. All right, so we get tendon, separation. This part is muscle. You know, so muscle in here, tendon locking on out there. Again, that is infraspinatus. Infraspinatus. Okay, next up. Going to be Terry's major and minor. We'll do Terry's major. Well, no, let's do Terry's minor first. Connects a little bit higher up. So here we go. Here's Terry's minor, right? You can see attaching to our scapula, right around in here. And again, going over, connecting to the bottom of our little wing thing over here. So we come look over here and say, okay, it's attaching up along here. And then also attaching right along here. And then we just kind of connect them up, right? So it sort of wraps around, locks on. Wraps around. We have kind of the belly of the muscle. Locks on, and then there's tendon kind of down there at the end, right? So we just need to know this is all kind of muscle out here. And then that little bit of tendon. So you can see how each of these things are kind of helping lock the humerus onto the scapula, and then can pull on it in all these different ways and help our arm rotate and move up and down and do all this different stuff. And so that's why it's called the rotator cuff. Each of these little things go in and pull on that humerus in different ways and make our arm do different things. You know, so that's teres minor. Boom, teres minor. And then teres major. Teres major. You can see I drew a little bit from the front as well, because you can see it sometimes from the front, but it's mostly visible from the back. But it's going to connect down to this bottom part of this wing down here that we didn't use with that first part, right? So it's going to come down here, and then it connects on the other side of the humerus, which is why I was showing it on the other one as well, right? So it comes up this direction and just sort of disappears back behind there. Right? It sits right back there. Right, so this is all muscle, but it's disappearing back behind here. Right? And so then kind of what I'm showing up here is that connection point, right? So if we wanted to, we can go up here real quick. Not going to fit super easily. Do it this way. There, that should work. Right, so then we'll come in here and say, okay, now we're seeing it, you know, being blocked by the scapula, and it's coming up this direction. Actually, it needs to attach higher. I made my scapulas too low this time, I think. But the attachment point should be a little bit higher up here, I think. Right, so I'll come down, and then boop. Yeah, actually that seems about right. So we get tendon here, right? And then muscle here, and it's just getting blocked by a scapula. That's muscle. So that is teres major. Okay, so once we got all that on there, right, then we can kind of go ahead and lock. Actually, no, we'll wait on the deltoid. We'll wait until we get like the tricep and bicep and stuff on there. So, but I want to kind of go layer things up, right? So we're going kind of like from deeper stuff to superficial stuff. So next up is going to be the coracobrachialis. This one's going to go up here. All right, so we have coracobrachialis. You can see it right here. Right, this one utilizes our little process thing that sticks off here, and then it comes down and connects to the humerus. Right, so we need to figure out how that relates to our drawing here. Right, so it's going to come up and lock onto this crazy little thing, you know, where you looked at it and you were like, what the heck is that thing? Well, it's the thing that the coracobrachialis attaches to. It'll come up and lock right onto it, and then it's going to come down and attach down onto the bone down here, right? And just kind of run this way. Oops, it's fairly thin. It should be pretty thin. That way, and it sort of wraps around the bone a little bit. Right, and the bone passes right by it like that. So that's where it attaches. This is, again, this is coracobrachialis. Coracobrachialis. Does that. This one's important because as soon as you lift your arm or look at the inside of the arm, kind of up near the armpit a little bit, this can become visible, you know. So that was not like such a deep muscle that, in fact, all of these are theoretically visible muscles, with the exception of, I'm trying to think of which one of these we wouldn't see. Supraspinatus is completely covered by the trapezius. So that one is more, we're just learning kind of for function, so you kind of understand how the shoulder works, but almost everything else we're learning can be visible, at least under some circumstance. You know, so all of this stuff is useful. So we have coracobrachialis, and then we just have the brachialis. We have right here, right? So we have brachialis, and you can see it sits way down here, right? So it attaches up onto the humerus, and then comes down and connects down to the ulna, right down on here, right? So we'll come over here and say, okay, it's going to do, it's going to come up and connect, looks like about halfway up, and it's going to have this kind of a connection. And then it's going to connect down here. I always kind of find the origin and insertion. That's what, the origin is kind of the starting point of the muscle, and the insertion is kind of like the end point. In case you're wondering the terminology. So our origin is the humerus up here, insertion is the ulna down here where this tendon connects. Right, so it's going to drop right down on there. This part is tendon. Muscle. Sits like that. It locks right on there. Sorry, I know I said I wasn't going to waste time drawing bones, but I do recommend you guys draw them. I know it can be boring drawing the same thing over and over, and you'll have to draw the bones a lot of times, but it's good for you, for sure. I mean, even if it's just for dexterity building purposes, it's good for you. Okay, this is brachialis. Brachialis. Okay, we have the biceps next, or the biceps brachii. I want to be technically correct. Looks like this. It's pretty long. And it utilizes this little thing again, remember? So there's multiple things that connect to that thing. And then it's going to wrap up and over the top and connect to the other side of the scapula, right? So it's going up and over on that one. And then down here, it's doing more stuff, right? And this looks kind of weird, and there's a reason for that. But this is just kind of a normal tendon like you would expect. This one is actually wrapping over other muscles and around other muscles. And like it's both a tendon to help function, and then it also helps hold things in place. It does like kind of multiple things, I guess, but it helps with, I don't know, bicep stuff, obviously. So it's going to connect. This one's long, so it's connecting up here and here again, right? But then it's also doing that little like up and over thing that I mentioned, where it's sort of coming up here. Like that. It's going all the way up and around the other side. Look at that kind of thing going on up here. Generally speaking, it's just going to sit about in there, right? And then it turns into tendon. Remember, I kind of said like find the top and then kind of figure out where it connects, and then we'll figure out how to match it all up. It's going to come and connect down here. This part's going to come and wrap around some stuff, like I said. Okay. Now we get the rest of this muscle, right? Comes down, wraps around. This side, same thing. It's right in there. Tendon starts here, and here, and here, right? So we got tendon, and then tendon that kind of splits into two different things down here. And then this is just like the belly of the muscle kind of, so we can just add some quick little striations, you know, some sort of indication. Indicate that it's different. And there you go, biceps brachii. Boom. Okay, so that brings us to the tricep, right? So we're going to go back to the other side again, and then add some stuff onto there. It's kind of bugging me. This is a little too long. It's going to drive me nuts. There we go. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so for triceps, again, we'll start with kind of the bottom. So this is the medial head, right? So we have there's three parts to the tricep, right? We have kind of the long head, lateral head, and medial head. Medial head is kind of underneath all of them. Kind of sticks on there like this. You can see it's coming down and connecting to the ulna, right? That part of the ulna that sticks out right here is what we're going to connect to. So it's going to start kind of up here, right? It's locking onto the humerus. And then it's going to connect right onto here, right? And so we need to figure out how to lock these together. So it's going to come out this way, back that way, right? And it's going to come down this way, and out that way. It has that kind of shape to it, right? So we'll add indication, just so we know there's a little tendon on that side, just a little bit, and then some muscle striations. There you go, triceps. Medial head. So we'll do the long head next. Looks like this. Connects right up onto the scapula right here, and comes down and connects into this kind of tendinous sheet right here, you know, which I'm guessing is like a aponeurosis or something. And then the other side of this is going to be where the lateral head connects, coming down the other way, right? So we're going to have multiple things kind of connecting onto here, but the first is going to be this long head. So we'll come in here and kind of look for how we can get this to connect right up on here, right? And then we have our connection point on the ulna, again, right here. Remember, starting with our two connection points. And then we're going to come in and figure out the shape of this piece of tendon. It's about like that. Notice, not really an even shape. It has an uneven kind of shape to it. Okay, so then this part's going to come down and sort of lock down there. And then this part, same thing. It's going to come down here and then lock down into there. Right, so we get sticks on there just like that. So we have triceps, long head. Tempted to draw the other one. I normally just paste another one of these up, but we may as well, since we're going to be using that same tendon, may as well just add it on, right? So here we have triceps, lateral head, right? So we have connecting up here onto the humerus again, and then coming down and connecting onto our tendon, right? So what's going on here now It's basically coming up right along here, right? For starters, right along the humerus, and then coming out this direction. And then it sort of makes a little ridge of muscle right along the edge of this tendon. Never understood exactly why that is or what function that has, but it's there for sure. All right, so it comes down and locks on kind of like that. Does that sort of thing. So long head, and then this is the lateral head. Lateral head. Boom. Boom. Okay, so that brings us to the key point here. Let's see if I can do this. I think that'll just barely work. Okay, cool. I'm going to try and cover both of these. One thing here. So that brings us to the outermost part that's going to cover up a lot of this stuff, which is the deltoid, right? You can see I've got this big deltoid thing here. So from the front, you can see it's connecting up to the clavicle and the acromion and like around the other side, right? So then it continues back here around the other side, along the acromion and down. And then it attaches out here onto the humerus, right? So it like wraps all the way around the shoulder, right? Like it starts on the front and goes all the way around to the back, right? So on the front, it's connecting up along here, along this part of the clavicle, right? And then kind of up along the acromion. And then disappearing back behind the other side. And then it's connecting down here onto the humerus. So it's going to come out, connect that way. And then here it kind of gets pulled tight a little bit. And then there's kind of like a belly to the muscle. And then it sort of wraps around like that. So that's a deltoid from the front. And then it has different heads, right? So it has kind of like a side section, right? And then kind of like, or like a front section, side section, and then there's a back section as well, which we'll talk about in a second. Right, so it kind of locks on there like that, but then it keeps going, right? Like it goes around to the other side and keeps coming this way. Kind of wraps around here and then down this ridge that way, right? And then from there, again, connects down onto humerus, kind of down here, right? So that's going to come out. Again, kind of gets pulled tight a little bit, and then you have less on my initial one that I did here, right? It has this kind of big section for the back. You don't see that as much from the back. From the back, it tends to get just kind of pulled tight. You maybe just have like a little bit of that. So it'll sit on there kind of like that. Right now, again, there's sections here, so we get kind of a separation between kind of like a back portion and like a front portion. So that's kind of what I'm drawing here. In fact, if you look here, right, I drew if you were looking at the arm from the side, which we're not seeing from either of these views, but if you look at it from the side, you can see it's got this center part, and then we're seeing just little slivers of the front part and the back part, right? And instead here and here, we're seeing mostly the back part, mostly the front part, and just a little bit of the side part on each. So you can see if you flip it and look at it from the side, it'll get that kind of shape. And you'll see those three different heads a little bit differently, or three different portions. So let's make this look like muscle a little bit. This is the deltoid. Boom. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the upper arm, right? So that brings us down to lower arm. And we'll start with the ridge muscles because they kind of help link the upper and lower arm. Though the ridge muscles will act as a bridge between the two. So we're going to do brachioradialis first. And we kind of see that from the front. We're going to draw it twice. So here it is. You can see, again, this is another one where it's sort of like doing this weird wrapping thing, and it doesn't look like it's pressed up directly against the bones, which is kind of weird, but that's because there's other muscles underneath it, you know, and so when we strip it out and look at it on its own, it looks a little funny. But it is pressed up against stuff. It's just meaty stuff and not bony stuff. But it is connected to the humerus right up in here, and then connected down to the radius, right, which is the thumb side of the wrist down on here. Right, so keeping track of the thumb and where the thumb is really going to help place this muscle and figure out what's going on with it, because this one is one of the main ones that are affected by the pronation that I talked about, right? So if this connects up here, but connects to the thumb, right, we get this weird thing going on where here it comes straight down, right, because it connects here, comes straight down, but then as I do this, now all of a sudden it's connecting here, cutting across. So we kind of need to understand how that works. That's really important, that concept. So we'll go ahead and draw it on here. This is supinated, right, which means the bones are straight and not crossed. So it's going to come in here. It's going to connect down along the humerus here. And then it's going to turn into tendon and connect right onto here. Right, it connects right into this little point right there. So it's going to come kind of out. Oh, let's see, out this way, down, and then tendon to here. Boom, boom. And then it's going to kind of overlap some of this stuff. Sort of comes down this way, turns into tendon, connects right down there. So it'll lock like right on there pretty much. And notice, like, I'm not copying this. Like, it's even a different size. It's a different arm. I drew different bones. It's different everything. It's just a guide that I created the first time I taught this class. All right, so this is muscle coming up and wrapping around. So that's a brachioradialis. But then we get this kind of weird thing going on where we have this other version of the brachioradialis, which looks like this, right? And now you can see we got our crisscross bones. So move this over a little bit. Right to there. And so now we're going to go ahead and figure out kind of how these bones can actually rotate. Right? Notice if we have our ulna here, which doesn't really rotate, it just kind of moves back and forth. That they are designed, or I don't know, formed in such a way that this one now can literally flop over the other way and now sits over here, right? And now this little part is now over here, right? And so we get these things. Coming off, let's see if I can remember how to do this. Go off this way. This, I think. Yeah, there we go. So now they do this, right? So we went from supinated to pronated. You know, and now we got our crisscross bones, but now that means we have our brachioradialis doing something totally different. Because if you recall, it connected way over here, right? So what do we do about that? That's kind of interesting. So this thing's shaped correctly. It connects like about there, maybe. Regardless, it's we're not going to be able to see most of this. This is going to get erased back out because it's going to be covered by the brachioradialis. So it's going to come out this way. Our tendon is going to come back this direction. Connect right into there. And then it's going to connect like that. We'll sit on there like that. Again, covering some of this stuff, but rotated now. So there we go. So this one is pronated. This one was supinated. And together, they are the brachioradialis. Well, not together. They're just one thing. Uh-oh. It's an I, not a U. Okay, so there we go. Brachioradialis. Brings us down to our forearm muscles, right? And again, I kind of want to layer them up. So we're dealing with the lower stuff first. Oh, actually, hang on. We have one more ridge muscle. Sorry. Let's do this one first. And then we'll do the other ones. Okay, so go down here real quick. This is, oh, not that one. This one. Extensor carpi radialis longus. This runs right underneath and next to the brachioradialis, the one we just looked at. It runs like right up along next to it, basically. And I can show you. I mean, they get almost grouped together a lot of the time because, I don't know, they just kind of bump into each other. But they do have different shapes a little bit and slightly different connection points. So we're looking from the back of the arm. It's going to connect up onto the humerus, right up along there. And then it's going to, tendon-wise, rather than stop here where the brachioradialis tendon stopped, it's actually going to keep going and have this like really long tendon, right? And then the muscle itself is going to be more like this. Right, so it does some of that twisting thing, right? Like it's sort of like twisting around on itself a little bit. We're seeing like a little bit of the inside of this right along here, right? And then it turns into tendon and just drops way down. And that is extensor carpi radialis longus. There you go. Let's do, trying to think, extensors, flexors, missing something here. Oh, there it is. So, this is another one that goes on the back. Oh, hang on, let me get my tracing paper set up first. Back of the arm. There's two of them here, but like they're only visible down here, you know, because like all this stuff gets buried by other muscle. So it's the abductor pollicis longus and the extensor pollicis brevis, right? As you can see, one's going to connect here. The other is going to connect like down around here, right? And probably sit up underneath it a little bit. But they connect to the thumb, right? So we get these kind of long tendons that run down here, connect to the thumb. And then the other one comes down and connects. Actually, it doesn't connect there. It comes down, they both connect to the thumb. They come up and connect to like different points on the thumb, right? Like one comes up and connects to like this bone, and the other it continues going and connects up all the way up to the farthest bone, right? So we'll get tendons running down through here. This one is going to kind of come off this way. Some belly to the muscle. Right, they'll sit kind of like that. And these are important because you'll see them, like we have our flexor and extensor group, which we'll do in a second, but these pop out from the side of that, right? And you'll see them kind of out on the side. So they're important to know. These turn into tendon along here, here, and those are kind of long tendons again that go all the way down to the thumb. It's muscle, that's muscle. We're running out of time. I'm not going to write these because they're long, but you can see them right there. I mean, I don't need to rewrite them. So that's kind of what those do. So we'll go in here, and we just got like 3 more of these to do, I think. This one's easy. This one is small, quick, called the anconeus. Little triangular muscle attaches, right? There's a little point that it'll attach to out here on the humerus, and it connects from humerus over to ulna, right? Down this ridge on the ulna and across like that. Pretty much it. Not a lot to that one. The striations kind of go this way, interestingly, right, like that. Anyway, that's the anconeus. Anconeus. Now the ones we've all been waiting for. We have our flexors and extensors. So let's do our flexor group first. These are extensors. I'll do this one up here first. So flexors, if you recall on our little hierarchy of forearm muscles, you know, if we look and we're wondering what's going on with the inside of the elbow, that's going to be our flexors, and you can see they kind of, we're going to group them together. There's a bunch of muscles, they're going to group together, and they're going to like kind of separate into 4 different little tendons down here, right? So it's going to connect up onto right here, this point out that hangs out here, right? And then it's just going to kind of like sit out this way as a big group. But then it turns into a number of different tendons, right? So we get one that's just kind of running down here. Right, we get another one here. Another one coming from up the middle. Oops. And then a final one coming down that way. Now, if you want to like pause this and like look at this and get really technical about how that's separating, you can. I mean, there's like the way I drew that is correct. It just groups things, right? So we get like a separation here, and then there's kind of a bigger separation here, coming down to this one, right? This one just sort of disappears up into here almost. And then there's another head popping out back here. right? So they do that. So that's our flexor group, right? So we have flexors. Group. Group them together. But understanding that there's a mass of muscles that sits here and connects to the inside of the elbow is super important. You know, and it's something we're going to use a lot. So the last one. I know this is a long demo, but next week will be much more interesting, I promise. Or at least not as long, and we will draw more than anatomical stuff. So extensor group, right? Back of the arm, or back of the forearm. Here we can see it's connecting to kind of like the outside of the elbow, right? And then dropping down and separating again into like kind of 4 different little things down here. It separates kind of into a group. If you'll notice, I specifically wrote like it's a group of 4 tendons and then like 1 separate tendon, right? And that's, I don't know, it's kind of important. At least if you want to like get like super technically accurate drawings. I mean, you'll need to know that because these tendons become visible like when we do things a lot of the time because they control all our fingers and hand and stuff. So again, it's going to connect right up onto here, right? Connects onto our humerus again, right here. And then we get all our tendons and stuff, right? So we get kind of this big group. You can really even just kind of draw literally like a group, like just a big oval. And then know that, okay, this oval now is going to separate into a group of like 4 tendons and then 1 tendon. Right, so it sits on there just like that. So we can kind of separate that group. Well, there's a bunch of tendons in there. I'm not going to find each one perfectly, but group, right, whole bunch. And then our one lone one. Find our connection points, right? So it's going to come here, boom, connect down here. Here to there. There you go. That is the extensors. That's pretty much it. So good job everybody for sticking in there if you made it to the end. And for full participation people, I mean, assignment wise, I mean, obviously this is a lot to turn in, right? But if you go through it and at least draw the bones, you know, and do like a clavicle scapula drawing and a, you know, humerus and forearm, like basically everything I drew here, you don't have to send in every single one of these. I mean, you don't have to do 18 submissions. It's a lot. And then I only do 1 tracing per person, right? But I will talk about more. The way that works typically is if I need people to turn in more stuff, like I'll print it out and I'll tape it up and I'll talk about everything and then I'll usually just draw on one because I don't have time to do 18 drawings for everybody, you know? So turn in, I don't need to see every single muscle necessarily, but turn in as many as you want to turn in. But I would recommend turning in the ones you had trouble with or don't understand or have questions about or aren't clear or whatever. And then keep track of your questions because you need to send those in as well. and or any comments or whatever. And then send in the drawings of the bones, because those are kind of important. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.